Greetings, former and future great masters, and blessings to all of you. We are here at this time to talk about what we call the knowledge, because this is the foundation to reaching the next level to real ascension. We said we would deliver the truth of ascension, and we will. The one who is ready for it will hear and see it clearly, as most of you already know.
George, if I were a university professor, I would be unable to write my books.
That's true.
Because all those very distinguished professors, whom I respect greatly, who are experts in their fields, and for example, in archaeology, one of them can pick up some shard from some broken up clay vessel, and he'll tell you that this is from the early Bronze Age, something that I cannot do. But they are specialized, and in order to keep their positions and be able to publish, etc., they have to follow the line. And many of them, when at scientific meetings and others which I used to attend, they come and whisper to me, "Of course you're right, but I cannot say so," because then I would be bound by political correctness, etc., and would hesitate to speak out.
Yeah, somebody would have tried to have muffled you, and I'm glad that...
I would muffle myself,
yeah.
Because, people make a living and have to protect their tenure, etc., and so I respect them, I understand them, but I have the freedom of calling it as I see it. But if you look at how the so-called Mayan calendar is constructed, which is actually the Olmec calendar, you see that it is based on 360. It is a mathematical calendar, and if you divide the number of days by 360, you arrive not at 2012, but I don't remember precisely now. It's either 2057 or 2087, I don't remember.
But it's in that gap somewhere.
Yes, so the 2012 is, in my opinion, not on firm footing.
Let's start off with a question. What is Earth's axis? Think of it as an invisible line going from the North Pole to the South Pole, right through the middle of the Earth, and it's tilted at a 23-degree angle. Now that you know what the axis is, let's talk about how it got its tilt. When the Earth was very young, it was hit by a Mars-sized object. This collision created an explosion that was so powerful, it tilted the Earth. It was this same explosion that created the moon. Also, if the axis wasn't tilted, we would only have one season, which would get really boring quickly. Well, that's how Earth got its tilted axis, and I hope you learned something.
10.500 voor Christus, een tijd van rampen. Wijzen de bouwers van Giza soms naar die verre tijden. De tijd waarvan de mythes vertellen dat de god Osiris en zijn helpers uit chaos kwamen om de eerste vruchten van beschaving te brengen. Waar kwamen ze vandaan?
Keep in shape. Looks like
we were created genetically by the Anunnaki as a worker to mine gold for them, to serve them. People out there, even if you're not a scholar, even if you're not anything, if you open your eyes a little bit to this, and you start just doing your own research, you're going to find paths there that lead you to some things that are going to awaken new ideas into you. And the next few years, I think we're going to see a watershed of information that is going to absolutely rewrite every book of history. There's evidence left over this entire planet when you start thinking, and you must believe, that we are the offspring of these people. If there was a God, the God created those people before they created us. But they were people just like us, only older, only more technically advanced. We need to rediscover that in ourselves, that we are a great civilization. We came from a great civilization. And I would tell anybody to look, open your eyes and look for it. Don't be blinded to something that's led to nothing but the slaughter of ourselves for thousands of years. And we still are at that point. We're still a warring society. When this documentary or others like it are put out there and enough people will see it, at least that will start a beacon somewhere that will start shining a little bit brighter. And so at some point we're going to see that we have a different history.
How is it doing this? Because the water's moving. The lake opened up, see? So the water, when the wind is pushing, the water's pushing all this up here.
Fear on this planet about the return of Nibiru, Planet X, and that has prevented a lot of people from being even curious as to the actual nature of the Anunnaki in that fifth dimensional energetic event. In this video, I would like to talk about, or relay a message, if you will, that the Anunnaki on Nibiru are actively trying to make contact with open minds to an unexpected message. It's true that these messengers, the Anunnaki, are relatively intimidating, especially in visual form, but that is why they are seeking adventurous and curious people to listen and tune in and listen. It is true that there is a great deal of fear on planet Earth about the return of Nibiru. It is mostly misinformation and well, not paranoia, but paranoia caused by misinformation. It is fear and hatred of an other that is seen as a threat to control systems that already exist on this planet. It is uninformation. It is not accurate. And I have found that as I have extended my connections and my consciousness off the planet to a distance, to a small distance, if you will, to a small distance off the planet, I am actually able to escape or to remove myself, my consciousness, from the energy of fear surrounding the return of Nibiru. So that makes me think that there's actually a field of intentional fear surrounding this planet so that people don't be curious about the return of Nibiru. And as I've connected with the Anunnaki energy on Nibiru, I've been able to sense not only is the information we provided that generates fear completely inaccurate, but the Anunnaki on Nibiru are actively trying to make contact with anyone who can penetrate that energy of fear on this planet. The Anunnaki, I'm not completely certain as to why the Anunnaki are not capable of making direct contact on this planet in form of message. They are influencing this planet in other ways, such as raising Kundalini, such as antagonizing in some ways some authority systems, but there is no way that I know of for direct contact from there to here. It takes a curious mind to venture to the Anunnaki on Nibiru. And that's why I would like to encourage anyone who has ever found themselves wondering what are the Anunnaki or what is Nibiru all about, to meditate on the idea, to channel if possible, but to overcome the fear associated with approaching the subject of contacting the Anunnaki on Nibiru, of sensing the energy of Nibiru. It is a call to courage, a call to try, a call to contact them. And when one uses proper etiquette for channeling, proper etiquette for energetic connection, for understanding the consciousness of another being, you will likely gain access to a conversation with the Anunnaki in one way or another, whether it be through synchronicity or it be through visual, symbolic dreams. It is likely that you will understand something different about the Anunnaki than what was expected. And that is the core message of this video, is that the Anunnaki on planet Nibiru are looking to make direct contact with minds that are willing to take the chance to break over the fear, to break open the fear, to get over the fear of the event that is supposed to be a cataclysm, the emergence that is supposed to be an apocalypse, the end times, the horrible disaster that the Nibiru event is supposed to be, isn't actually even going to be a three-dimensional event. It is a fifth-dimensional, heart-centered event. That aside, the Anunnaki on Nibiru are looking for those who would like to hear that message. The Anunnaki on Nibiru are looking for an audience, essentially. And they are willing speakers. They are willing speakers. The Anunnaki, as most warrior class ET species do, they respect courage, they respect diligence, they respect the pursuit of goals and the accomplishment of those goals. So I encourage you to dial up, if you will, the Anunnaki on Nibiru and see if you can make contact, or at least to channel or connect with consciousness. It doesn't even have to be something as large scale of an expectation of being abducted. That is not what I understand would happen. What I understand would happen is that you'd be given a sense of a new understanding of the nature of Nibiru, of the Anunnaki within that fifth dimensional event on planet X, if you will. That is what I would like to say in this video. If you are curious about the Anunnaki on Nibiru, give them a ring.
Greeks went back to Egypt. They asked the Egyptian priest cults what was civilization like a long time ago, and they said that in the previous 10,000 years they had major devastating events. These were the type that crushed their civilization. Not wars, not pestilence, but dramatic physical events that literally crushed their civilization back into the cave ages. And we see the devastation in cities in South America, ancient cities that are now being discovered, which were obviously destroyed by massive earthquake type situations. Earth definitely, without question, has had major earth changes that have destroyed entire civilizations, and the indication is that it was not that long ago. The concept of a pole shift, in other words, the earth moving its either magnetic or physical pole, has come up many times when we hear people talking about Planet X. Mountain ranges would form, oceans would form huge tides, and this would not be something you'd want to face in everyday life. It would be a very violent event.
There's evidence that in the past, such as the Ice Age and mastodons being frozen instantly with still undigested food in their stomach, all over the Earth, there is evidence that in the past we have had polar shifts or some type of cataclysmic event on Earth which happens in cycles over time.
If this is in fact true, there would have to be evidence of these passages, ecological evidence, archaeological evidence that shows the calamitous events that transpire during each passage.
Our Earth gives evidence that we have had periodic pole shifts. There's mountain building in and of itself is evidence. These mountains are like pushed together. If you're in an airplane and you look down at foothills, for instance, it almost looks like a rumpled blanket, like somebody took a blanket and pushed it and rumpled it. Mountains are forced upwards with great masses of rocks snapping. This is signs of great pressure, not the gentle squeezing and pushing that happens with earthquakes at all. Indeed, our Earth has had these periodic pole shifts. You can see that in the evidence of the Earth. Go back every time period and you can see other changes during these passages. And when we have pole shifts and violent geological earthquakes and changes and the like, shifting of the tipping of the Earth and shifting of the crust, volcanoes explode. And when they do, there's a lot of molten lava pouring out. Well, lava, being molten, will line up with the current magnetic field. And when lava hardens, that's a permanent freeze, indicating the direction of magnetism at that moment in time. Well, this is one way that they have determined the wandering pole theory, where they've identified places on Earth where they say at one time this appears to have been the North Pole, or that appeared to have been the South Pole, is through this frozen lava alignment. For instance, off of Japan, there's cities and roads that they find under the water. In Bermuda, we see roads and walls and the like. Likewise, land can rise. Atlantis is rumored to be a continent that went under the waves during one of these cataclysmic passages.
Back around 1650 BC, or if you want to give it a little more leeway, between 1500 and 1700 BC, there is considerable evidence for a calamitous event. In fact, there are stories from that time showing certain civilizations came and went, certain powers that be were overthrown at the time because of the celestial events that were happening and the earth changes that were happening.
The last passage was during the Jewish Exodus, approximately 3,600 years ago. Nobody knows for sure the exact date, because during these passages, mankind is just discombobulated. They stop keeping records. Records are lost, so nobody can exactly pinpoint the date.
There is a pattern to the cataclysms on Earth. If we go back every 3,600-year period, we see that some major world catastrophe happened. There are other changes happening in the solar system. One such theory says that cow flatulence, believe it or not, is responsible for depleting our ozone layer, which leads to our polar caps melting. But what about Mars? What about Mars's polar caps? They seem to be melting as well. There are many changes happening in the solar system. So what would be influencing our entire solar system as a whole, not just Earth?
Observations are being made, and with little notice to the public. This article from CNN tells of a potential killer comet detected with only weeks of warning. In recent times, new planets and outer solar bodies are being discovered and observed. With so much sky to observe, it's no wonder we have so many last-minute reports of potential near misses. Or could there be more that is being downplayed in the media or withheld altogether?
There are a lot of probes that we send to Mars or to the outer planets to do imaging, which could also have black ops projects attached to them that the public isn't going to know about. So if we send an orbiter to Mars to do a main mapping mission, it might have other black ops projects attached to that satellite collecting its own data that we're just not going to know about. And if they need to take into a full account the main mapping mission, or take over that project for their own purposes, that satellite is gone. It becomes a black project, and people aren't aware of those facts.
The observatories around the world, many of them are very aware, acutely aware, and very worried about this inbound planet.
You really need to look at what's happening, the weather irregularities, the changes in the Earth, and think of it in terms of these periodic passages and make up your own mind.
We don't have to have a collision for something to affect us. It can affect us at a distance. It could be on the other side of the sun, have a very large discharge into the sun. The sun could erupt with a full coronal discharge, which means it would come off in all directions from the sun. And we would be very affected. Our weather would be very affected, and this new object, Planet X or whatever you would call it, would be very far away from Earth. So the thing I want to stress is that you do not need a direct collision with something to be affected. The government agencies, they are basically under contract not to tell you anything. The scientists have signed non-disclosure agreements. Basically, they're under a gag order. It is impossible to go to a scientist and get a news release directly. You have to go through an official news release agency, and they would give you information that has been blended and made nice for you.
Author of numerous books, this one, The Earth Chronicles Handbook. Zechariah, two things really fascinate me. Your work on the Anunnaki and, of course, biblical prophecy, both of which you've studied quite a bit, probably more than most. Do they tie in together, the Anunnaki? I mean, will they return?
Yes. The ancient myths are not mythology. I de-mythologize mythology. And I think this is the second important point to remember. And that is that others from another planet in our own solar system, that's a key difference. I'm not talking about what people would grant you. Well, you know, this whole thing, the nonsense about extraterrestrial, etc. Mm-hmm. We, of course, as thinking and intelligent people, we do not rule out that there's some life somewhere else, but this is light years away, and they'll never visit us, and we'll never visit them. I say, no, there's another planet with advanced people on it in our own solar system. So travel is possible, communication is possible. You're asking, will they return, but are you sure they left? And of course,
look at it. You know how long it's going to take to melt all this? It sounds like a train. Last night it sounded like a tornado going through. Look at it. You know how long it's going to take to melt all this? It sounds like a train. Last night it sounded like a tornado going through. That is crazy. I wonder how they're going to stop it. Oh, there's definitely some dust straight shot in. Really fast and bushy. Nikki, it just busted through a door over here! All the way through, the door's caving! Look at that!
No idea it would be as big as it was. The delta was devastated. Basic essentials for life were stripped away. The immense weight of the ice brought down trees, and electricity was the first thing to go. And for many, it took weeks, not days to restore.
I have considered long and hard and still have many considerations to go. But in considering the plan of Anu, the reptilian of the Anunnaki, I have concluded this. The path to achieve his goal is a loophole. And that is to say, application with a way out. And if there is anything Anu applies, it is control. Whether it be self-control or control of neighbor as self. And through, or to achieve this control, Anu gets people or gets entities to believe. Because the belief is actually what allows one to abdicate self-control. But there's a problem with that, because the loophole is ignorance, and one cannot enter this world without being ignorant. And if Anu was to ultimately enter this world and be a part of this world, he too would have to be ignorant. He too would have to come under control and participate in a belief system, abdicating self-responsibility by his own choice. And this creates a problem for someone extremely focused and fearful of control. Because the point that leads to control, that point of self, that is chaos, that is lawlessness, is a frightening place. It is a place where anyone can do anything. It is a place beyond belief. It is a place of equality. And for someone who believes in himself so much, having any other expression other than his own is really quite frightening, because consider an equal to Anu and consider the possibilities. If everything realized that potential and exercised that potential. And so this idea of creating a world of control, entering it, and yet not being under its control is a problem. So what does Anu do? He creates a world without control. But he creates a world based on belief. And so this idea that the world is under control, but isn't, is what has kept things in order up till now. The problem or the solution is people are realizing there is no control. There are no boundaries. There are no limits. That the point of law is to get rid of law. And this possibility to be free of belief is the loophole that allows Anu to assume control. Now, Anu being Anu understands he has no control. It is a point of belief. But if Anu is to exist in a world in peace, that is to say, in security, in comfort, in freedom, there must be no control. And this idea of apparently handing control over to the people is a step in that direction. Because the process has been, for hundreds of years, for people to accumulate their awakeness, their non-ignorance. And the powers that be knew that this was to happen. They understood the process. And so they sought to stop it. They sought to control it, even though controlling it was actually impossible, because it is natural. And the best way for these powers that be to lose their powers is for them to expose themselves. And it is done through the process of by their fruits you will know them. And within the fruits are the seeds. And these powers that be, being the seeds of their own destruction, are being exposed en masse. And so the more they fight, the more they struggle to maintain control, the more they expose themselves, the more they weaken their position, and the more they set themselves up to ultimately fail. That is part of the plan of Anu. Because if Anu is to rule the world, there can be no competition. There can be no higher power. And for that, God as people know it must cease to exist. The belief in God as people know it must cease to exist. People's belief in government as it exists must cease to exist. But there is that point of ignorance. The point of ignorance through which Anu must pass, or has passed, is the point in which one loses oneself, if it may be called that. And being aware of the process, having witnessed it many times, Anu was aware that ultimately one does not lose oneself. One simply loses perhaps memory or association with self. And that is the ultimate loophole that leads to life. Because no matter what one considers oneself before one loses self-definition, the point of realization of self-responsibility to define oneself once more opens the door to be anything and everything one wants to be. And Anu understood that this point is a point of death. The ultimate plan of Anu is to die. Because Anu understands, just as all of his forebears before him, Anu was going to die. Whether it be in millions of years, billions of years, or trillions of years, it doesn't matter. When one experiences eternal life, one must experience it in time. Because eternity only has relevance in time. And in time, everything dies. So the only answer is to die. But that poses a problem. How does one die and yet live? By making oneself equal to life. By making oneself equal to that which never dies. And in the process of making oneself equal to life, one allows oneself to be free, to be secure, to be at peace. Because there is nothing that can kill life. It only changes form. It is an interesting idea to say that a house that is divided against itself cannot stand. And yet, the way to become one with life on earth is to become one with the earth. And the earth is a divided house. It is divided between land and water. It is divided between inside and outside. And that poses a problem, because how is one to stand in life, as life, on earth? Because of earth, we are divided ourselves. The earth is upheld. It does not stand. It spins. It is constantly moving. And so, in this, the apparent division works together in obvious harmony. That is the ultimate loophole. To take whatever is given and ultimately come up with life.
So it turns out that if aliens ever show up here on Earth, little green men might be the least of our problems. A new study indicates that instead, they'll probably be more like super intelligent dinosaurs, as smart and as cunning as humans. As one scientist put it, we would be better off not meeting them. Sleep tight.
And I provide evidence, including some data from NASA, that around 550 BC they did leave. But they promised to return. There's no doubt about it. They promised to return. Whether, even if you go to the so-called Mayan or Aztec, Quetzalcoatl, before he left, he said, I will return. And he said, I will return, and he gave them a date. He said, when the bundle will come together, that they were promised, on the other side of the world, in the Americas. And I show, by the way, in my books, I have the book, The Lost Realms, show that the whole thing is one ball of wax. All the gods were the same gods, though called by different names. So they will return, and the biblical prophecies will come true. I give three like calendars. I say there's the earthly calendar that you and I use, and say today is Monday, etc. And then there's the divine calendar, which is their orbital period. And then I said to combine the two to create some kinds of sense of proportion. They devised what I call the celestial calendar, which is really what we call the zodiac, the 12 zodiacal houses. The prophecies, there was a very wise and important fellow called Daniel, and he was privileged because the angels were speaking to him.
That's right.
And he could question them, and he kept asking them, when will they return? And he got all kinds of answers, including the famous times and a half, and Sir Isaac Newton. By the way, I mentioned him, and I was privileged to see his handwritten document where he made the calculations, and he also arrived at the variety of dates, but his preferred date was 2060 AD. Which is still this century. So I think, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, that we are talking about this century.
This particular piece of metal is an amazing piece of technology. It's capable of being grown in 15 different crystal systems. Now, I'm a geologist, and I, prior to 15 or 20 years ago, knew of only 6 crystal systems. There's actually 15, if you count all the alien metals. Now, this is only element 140. If you look at the local periodic table in your local library, it says 104. and tell you what the alien agenda is. And it's going to sound very familiar. The alien agenda is the complete takeover of this planet, the killing off of 5, 6 to 7/8 of the world's population by the year 2029. The U.S. military has known about this for 45 years. They've told no one. As far as I know, I'm the only person standing before a crowd talking about the alien agenda, secretively. There was the created 1954 treaty where Eisenhower signed a pact with the known alien species of the time. There were 3 at the time. And said that we're going to deal in high technology, but you can take a few head of cattle and a few human beings and you can experiment on them. Now, the created 1954 treaty had been violated. After the great firefight, the alien-human war, I am the only living survivor talking about it worldwide at all. Only one. The other 2 are in nursing homes in Canada, and the Canadian government refuses to allow any U.S. people, including myself, to talk to them. The New World Order, the alien agenda, is one and the same. It's world takeover and the decimation of the population of this planet. Now, I'm going to tell you something a little bit different about the alien species. The bad news ones, there are 9 races of alien populations. To look at a human being as a bag of food. They're not cannibals. They don't eat the flesh and the bones and all that kind of stuff. They use the glandular secretions of animals and human beings as a mixture of the vitamins for their food. They get high off of our adrenal gland substances called adrenal chrome. It's something like cocaine to them.
But it would probably take a whole lot of time. The reason I state that, when I got out in 1989, we had cataloged 57 different species. You have individuals that look very much like you and myself that could walk among us and you wouldn't even notice the difference, except for some of the things that they might be able to go ahead, even in a dark room, and touch an object and go ahead and identify what color that object might be. They would have a heightened sense of smell, sight, hearing. The situation is that you have various types of what we normally call grays. We didn't call them grays in the military, but you had at least 3 types of the grays. You had some that were much taller than we were. The unique thing that I'd like to point out for the most part is that the entities that we did catalog were in fact humanoid. Now this created a situation where the scientific community was trying to figure out why that would be the case, because you would expect that if life evolved on other planets, that they would take on some type of other being, so to speak, not necessarily look humanoid or be bipedal such as we are. But apparently we got quite a few of the species out there that are humanoid in appearance, and that creates a question that yet has to be answered by science.
What have you seen the royal family do, the Queen Mother, and the other people you've seen in the rituals? What have you seen them do?
I've seen all of them drink human blood and consume human flesh, and they have their own goblets in which they have blood, and these goblets are encrusted with jewels, and they also have their own daggers, and that the dagger goes into the goblet, and they stir the blood around with it, and it's also a
involving the royal family of Britain.
Yes, involving the royal family of Britain, and the sacrifice and the eating of, consuming the sacrifice, and they are involved in that.
You've seen them do that?
Yes, I have seen them do that. The human body that they choose to occupy or take when it was young, it ages, but when they take the reptilian form, these reptilians live hundreds of years. So the essence of her will go into another body that is also has the ability to shapeshift into reptilian form.
One of the pure reptilian human bloodlines.
Yes.
What happens when, take the Queen Mother as an example, what happens when they shapeshift? I mean, what do you see?
You start to see changes happen, and they're happening so fast that it's almost, it's the closest thing that I've seen to it is what they're now doing with computer technology. It's just a literal transformation that happens very quickly.
What is it about the rituals that allow the shapeshifting to happen?
When the victims are starting to be sacrificed, it's the scent of the blood, and they start shape-shifting at that point in time, and they can hardly wait to get to the blood. It's like they're addicted to the blood, and then the consumption of human flesh that follows. Sacrificial babies are taken in utero at 3, 5, and 7 months.
Now, what I'm telling you is kind of almost like a brain overload here. Back in 1946, we set off a number, actually 4 atomic bomb tests at Bikini Atoll. In 1947, after Roswell debacle, U.S. military knew all about flying discs, and flying disc technology is early, thoroughly early. It was 1933. Of course, remember the Germans did too, the Nazi Germans, Hitler and all their bunch of people.
So Quetzalcoatl to return.
Yes.
I even showed that, which nobody else does, because they didn't go to Mexico as many times as I did, and go to museums where nobody else goes and found those things. There's actually a sculpture, a Mayan sculpture, where the god, the departing god, that is depicted, by the way the Mesopotamians depicted their gods, tells a Mayan chieftain, points to him to the 10th planet, the Nibiru, and says, I assume, because there's the symbol for speaking, that's where I'm going back to, and I'll come back.
Nearly every culture, ancient culture, has talked about end-time prophecy, which, in some form or fashion, as a member of the human race, it's kind of scary when you think about it. I've got grandchildren and children, and I think about them, Zechariah. I think about what's going to happen and what's left for them. Does this bother you at all? Does this scare you at all, knowing what you know?
Well, I don't know whether scary is the word. It's we are definitely, maybe we are fortunate that we are living at this time of end of era. When one wants to understand what was prophesied, what happened in the past, and what might happen in the coming future, is one has to remember that all the prophecies are making it very clear when, for example, there is a statement, I'm the first and I'm the last. The last thing shall be the first things, etc. We are talking about a cyclical. We are not talking about a linear progression.
Right.
That's why when there was year 2000, and people ask me what would happen 2000, I said after 2000 will come 2001, because this is a linear calendar. It's a linear calendar. So we have to deal with the cyclical calendar. The zodiac is a cyclical calendar. And therefore, every ending is a beginning. Every ending is a beginning. So let's not lose hope.
The infamous Area 51, S4, S2, a CIA base. It was originally a bombing range, a nuclear test site. It was later become the most secret base in the United States. It employs over 18,000 workers who work in shifts of 12 hours at a whack. Most of them work in the cover of darkness, like us. We built out 9 underground military bases there, each with an average capacity capable of basically a city underground, roughly 4.25 cubic miles hollowed out underground. They don't bore, they literally vitrify and melt the rock, deflagrate the rock. It's a very sophisticated laser melting and deflagrating system. It reduces the rock to a powder and then melts the remaining rock as a coating on the inside of the base, so you don't have to use gunite cements and other kinds of things like that. That's all old hat now. Technology is just basically the new technology we get is the old hat of the military. I'm going to be real brief about it. I carried a level 1 security clearance, the Rhyolite 38 factor. There are very few of us. There's nobody except myself, to my knowledge, talking like this. Nobody. I'm breaking the law. I'm breaking world as well as federal law. I'm coming out and even talking about this to a group of people. I love my country more than I love my life. Now, another thing I want to reach to you is that during the unbelievable part, I was involved in building another base inside of Dulce, New Mexico, which is Los Alamos Laboratory. It's a biological laboratory. On the southwest part of the Archuleta Mesa, we built an underground facility, a better part of 3 cubic miles hollowed out underground. Then to the southwest of that, we were in the process of the early stages of building. We drilled 4 large tunnel-like holes. Some of them ran 2.5 miles under the surface. Number of the original wells or drilling machines that were used were at the rate of 2 miles a day. It was fairly rapid. The equipment kept coming up broken. So we wanted to go down, we wanted to send somebody down there, a human observer, or human observers in this case, to find out what was going on. Well, to our total surprise, first of all, the government knew all about it. They didn't tell anybody. When I saw Green Beret and Black Beret people encamped inside of our geologist camp, I knew something was up. The gig was up. First of all, I knew all about the alien agenda. I'll explain that in a few minutes. The large alien grays had been encamped there for as best as believed possible about 400 or 500 years.
If there is an illustration from antiquity that shows a so-called eagle men, ancient astronauts, saluting a rocket. Now, if that same depiction would have been shown to me 100 years ago, I would have said, well, this is, I don't know, some 2 bird-like people saluting a very large pencil. And if somebody would say, no, it's not a pencil, it's a rocket, I would say, rocket, what's a rocket? So obviously, as we advance and as science keeps confirming and confirming, for example, when I started writing, and I said, according to the Sumerians, Mars served as a way station, that was really held to be almost ridiculous, because Mars was deemed a totally uninhabitable planet with no air and no atmosphere and no water and no nothing. So here I come and say they said that Mars was a way station, a space base. And now we know that there was water on Mars, and maybe there still is now water on Mars. There were seas and lakes, etc., etc. Now I said that they came here because they needed gold with which to protect their dwindling atmosphere. And now I read that a statement a couple of weeks ago by the chief scientific advisor of President Obama, who at a conference dealing with global warming, which is really climate change, said, well, all options are on the table, including geoengineering. Now, what is geoengineering? He was asked, he said, well, even such a fantastic idea as creating a shield above our atmosphere to shield us from the sun. And that's exactly what I said the so-called Anunnaki who had come here had done on their planet so long ago.
In my hand here, I have a piece of what's called corbamide. It's the heaviest element in the world. Element 140. This piece of material weighs 15 ounces. It's 3.5 times the weight of uranium. It cannot be made to emit gamma rays. It cannot be isotoped. It is totally stable. It is used in all stealth aircraft and all Phoenix-class submarines. When combined with other alien elements, it is impregnable. It cannot be melted with charged particle beam weapon. When properly combined in secretive compounds, it can withstand temperatures in excess of 10 million degrees Fahrenheit. It is grown by aliens who have given a good... The other side of the alien question is, some of these aliens have broken off from their mainstream and said, we're not getting a fair shake, and so this is what happens. And I'm talking about the alien grays. Some of them broken away. Area 51 is only one base, one of the 131 bases. Of these 131 bases, I call Area 51 a mega base. It's got more than one base in it. It's Tonopah Test Range, Area 51, S2, S4, Groom Lake, and a host of others. Now, these mega bases are gobbling up our gross national product. Right now we're spending 28% of the gross national product on building underground bases solely. That doesn't count for the defense budget. That doesn't count for the spare parts budget. It doesn't count for any of that at all. And the black budget is dead wrong. It sidesteps the United States Congress and its Constitution of its people and says you're a bunch of morons you don't need to know. Now, I believe in military preparedness. I believe in military secrecy to some extent. Because there's always going to be spies out there, and there are always going to be people that want your hunk of territory, your house, or your ground, maybe even a country like that. All this alien thing is fine, except for now. All this alien thing is fine, except for one thing. Alien takeover is a serious threat. kept totally out of the public view, off the surface. I'm sure the underground bases, without question, are being used as a place to house alien takeover. Alien takeover means the implementation of a one-world government. Now, I'm going to sum up this talk and mention an overview of the alien agenda. The alien agenda is really decimate the planet, to take the remaining human subjects as slaves, and the aliens would use this planet for their own means. Number one, this cannot be allowed to happen. The world takeover plans of the New World Order, a direct carbon copy blueprint from Adolf Hitler's routine of 1933 to 1938, must not be allowed to happen. The overview is about underground mountain bases. All of them should be made public.
And what is so remarkable now, too, Zechariah, astronomers are beginning to discover distant planets now in other systems. And, you know, one day they will find that extra planet in this solar system, I am sure.
Well, they found it in 1983. The so-called IRAS, you know.
Right. But do you think that is Nibiru?
Of course. Well, you know, I had one of my friends was the important astronomer Harrington at the U.S. Naval Observatory, and I met him, and he gave me an interview on tape, videotape, and he pointed to a bookshelf behind his desk, and there was my book, the one you mentioned, The 12th Planet, and he said, whenever I reach a tough question, a tough point, I pick up your book, he said, for inspiration and guidance. So, no, the planet was seen, and it was immediately, the next day, quashed and hush-hushed, and then, as I write in my book, Genesis Revisited, it led to the whole change in relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union. And if you recall, I'm sure, George, that Reagan went to the United Nations, and speaking about his meetings with Gorbachev, said, I told him, and Reagan points with his finger up, he said, what if we all realized that we are in danger from somewhere else? Wouldn't we forget our small quabbles and unite, etc.?
Have been one of their internal bases, and we drilled holes right on top of it. All the stinking air, all the black sooty air came right out as soon as the first hole was sunk, and all this soot came up, and well, that's when it all the hell broke loose, really. All started. Anyway, after we drilled all 4 holes, it took about 2 days to drill all 4 of them. And when you build an underground base, you drill 4 basic holes, and then you build called stopes or cross-member holes across, and then you use blasting equipment, special blasting equipment by the analyzation of the rock formation, and you literally blast out or tunnel out or deflagrate or melt rock out to build the large rooms that are required for this underground base. Well, in this process, I was lowered down the basket of one of these holes, and about from me to this elderly woman here in the front was sitting a 7-foot-tall alien gray. The stench was worse than the worst garbage can you can imagine. The person the entity was absolutely horrible. I didn't waste any time or reach for my pistol. At that time, as an engineer, I didn't have time to carry all the folder, all of one of these big submachine guns that all the sea spray and the yellow fruit and all the outer perimeter and inner perimeter security people carried. I carried an old Walter PPK pistol with a 9-shot clip. This was in late August of 1979. Now, You got a regular suit of clothes, you got a regular clothes on, plus you're in almost like a spacesuit environment, and you're reaching for a gun. It's not the easiest thing to do, and then to pop a clip in it and start shooting. And I killed 2 of them. Yes, they're mortal, and they do die. However, in the process, one of them did this. All I remember is that he just kind of waved his hand in front of his chest, and the next thing I know, this blue beam hit me and just literally opened me up like a fish, and burnt my fingers right off of me. And it was some form of electrical force, because the kind of like being hit by a lightning bolt burned all my toenails off of me, completely crispy crittered my left foot, and burnt the shoe right off of me. All I remember is the smoking remains, and I'm still conscious, but in and out of, I didn't remember much. And there was a Green Beret that was right behind me that risked his life. In fact, he died. But he risked his life. He shoved me back in the basket and hit the button and took me up. And I wouldn't be alive talking to you today if it wasn't for him. I'm forever indebted. He lost his life. 66 Secret Service agents, Green Berets, Black Berets, crack troops lost their lives because the government, our United States government, lied, did not tell us anything about the alien threat. There's a war underneath there, and I'm talking dead serious. It's been going on since that time. Since late August of 1979, our military, the Russian military, basically the militaries of the world, have been in constant conflict with the outer space alien. The small gray, the large gray, the reptilians, the whole thing. There are 11 distinct races of aliens. 2 are benevolent. 1 had to leave here in a hurry because their world is under attack, both on the surface as well as underground. They're the Pleiadians. We're familiar, maybe some of you are familiar with that. Would some of you raise your hands who've heard of Billy Meyer and some of the, very good, about half the group. Well, Billy Meyer is one of these lucky people that they figured, well, he's kind of a simple type, we'll show him everything. Well, these are the benevolent aliens, and they've been here helping us. In fact, I have a picture, let me reach for it here. I have a picture of one of the aliens been working for the United States Pentagon for the last 58 years. His name is Valiant Thor. He's right here. There's my father in the background. This whole place, the ready room of the USS Eldridge, Al Bielika has probably explained, or maybe even shown you this picture. There's a list of some of the notable people in it. They're all the atomic bomb scientists of the day, all the time variant experimentalists of the day, all the top physicists of that particular day. This was in August of 1943. Now this guy has not changed 1 iota in 58 years. Started work, he came here, crashed here or whatever, whether he's under duress or not. He started work for our U.S. Navy and military operations in 1937, either 37 or 38 is what I've been told. So it's for 58 years, this man's been employed, probably under duress. If you don't do as we say, we're just going to use you for alien bait or something, I don't know. But anyway, he basically hasn't changed. He lives for 490 years, is what he says his lifespan is. Now, he's supposedly a semi-benevolent, he's a human-looking type person. He has 6 fingers and 6 toes, and he's got 1 oversized heart, 1 lung, giant lung. His blood vessels are bigger. He's got copper oxide for blood, similar to an octopus. His brain capacity 300 centimeters greater than ours. He has a thinking capacity, IQ, if you were to measure it, be totally off the scale, be about a 1200 IQ. He speaks 100 languages fluently, alien as well as others. He's a remarkable person. I had a chance to meet him one time. Now, by the way, he doesn't shake hands. He's kind of in a spacesuit because all aliens, regardless benevolent or otherwise, they're carrying germs and diseases and bacterium in and on them that are deadly to us. If I were making policy, I'd quarantine them all because how do we not know that some of our diseases like AIDS, Ebola, hantavirus, and a few of these other weird designer diseases, as I call them, are not made from the cadavers of some of these aliens as a biological weapon to use against the people of the United States.
With dirt, and now this came from the sky. It didn't blow in. It came with the rain. Now our skies are this dirty. So here's the mystery. What caused this dust and this dirt to come in and land on everybody's vehicles? I mean, we've been sick. Everybody's been sick in this town. Pig flu, the swine flu, HN1, whatever it's called. It's the 1 series, whatever, HN1, H something another N1, I don't know, I'm not a doctor. My family used to be pig farmers. We knew better than to mess around kissing with hogs and stuff, catching the diseases, but anyhow, this whole city is just full of people. There's already 6 that's died from the swine flu, and there's 24 more that's been affected so far, just north of us.
KTVU may come as a bit of a comfort to sufferers and says this is not something they've imagined. It's quite real. On the other hand, there's no known cure.
How far would you go to get your answers?
Woo! Come on, you ready to do this? I know you are.
Are you seeing this?
Affirmative.
Anne's 40-year-old husband, Tom, died 2 years ago in January, and she believes his death was due to a contagious illness that has infected her entire family.
Tell me what you believe is happening on your skin. It's like fibers that come out of your skin?
Yes, there's this fibrous material. It's in layers.
I look at your arm.
Our hands swell and they itch and...
It's been described as feeling as if either bugs are crawling on the surface of your skin or underneath your skin.
Both horrifying and fascinating. From here in Florida to the Bay Area, something seems to be causing a mysterious new disease.
In my mind, an engineer that sacrificed himself with this virus and that created this horrific...
What we thought we knew is just a tiny tributary of what's actually going on.
We'll find out who this was.
They are not gods. They say out of slow-healing skin lesions will come bizarre filaments.
We'll know nothing.
Those engineers made something they shouldn't have.
We know that there is something real going on here.
Where did he come from?
Paradise.
Take us home!
If you don't stop it, there won't be any home to go back to.
Big things have small beginnings.
State health officials addressed hundreds of concerned parents and community members here at Leroy Junior Senior High School. But for some of them, the information that officials had to give just wasn't enough.
We do have some answers. We will share as much as we can without sharing the diagnosis. We can't do that. It's not right. It's a federal issue. Share as much as we can without sharing the diagnosis. We can't do that. It's not right. It's a federal issue.
Zechariah, do you know if the Sumerian tablets are still intact, or, were any of them ruined because of the war in Iraq, or are they still in a museum, safe and sound? Do you know?
Well, those that were taken out of Iraq, and we are talking now 150 years of archaeology. So there are tens of thousands of tablets, some fully intact, and some partially intact, and some in fragments, and some fully legible, and some not legible to some extent,
I know it sounds crazy.
My name, as I said, was Paul Hellyer. I'm a former Minister of National Defence for Canada. I served in 3 governments during a total of 23 and a half years as a Member of Parliament. Although as Minister of National Defence, I had sighting reports of UFOs. I was too busy to be concerned about them at the time because I was trying to unify the Army, Navy, and Air Force into a single Canadian Defence Force. And that itself was a kind of battle to the finish. So this was not high on my agenda. But about 10 years ago, I started getting interested due to a young man from Ottawa sending me material on the subject. I told him I was too busy to read it, but he had confidence that someday I would. He sent me a copy of Colonel Corso's book, The Day After Roswell. It took me a while to get around to reading it, but I took it for my summer reading in 2005 and was really impressed with what was contained in it. And what I thought to myself is there are huge issues here, huge issues. And the American people and the people of the world have a right to know what's going on because they're part of it. It's not just an isolated thing. And so after confirming the contents of the book with a retired United States Air Force general, I accepted the invitation of Victor Vigiani, who's over here somewhere, and his cohort Mike Bird to speak to a symposium at the University of Toronto. And I said, UFOs are as real as the airplanes flying overhead. That gave me the dubious distinction of being the first person of cabinet rank in the G8 group of countries to say so unequivocally. Since then, I've learned a lot from many sources, including a number of the fantastic witnesses that we have heard these last 4 days. They were so outstanding, I was just really blown away with them, the amount of information that was available. And I appreciate every single one of them. But because I'm not a ufologist, I'm a politician, there are only a few things that I want to add in that particular realm. First is that about in the 1960s sometime, it was a flotilla of UFOs headed south that crossed into NATO territory in Europe. And the Commander-in-Chief of the Supreme Allied Headquarters in Europe was naturally very shaken. Fortunately, or maybe divine providence, before the panic button was pushed, the flotilla turned around and headed back north. Obviously, they had thought maybe they were Russian, and they were very concerned about it. Anyway, the investigation was launched into this whole subject, and a document was prepared which concluded that at least 4 species had been visiting Earth for thousands of years. And this is my own view at this stage as well. So, except for that, there are just a couple of things that we've talked about that I'd like to refer to. And one was that we were referring to them as they until this morning when Linda Moulton Howe, I think she was the first one, actually named 3 different species. I have brought my latest book called Light at the End of the Tunnel, A Survival Plan for the Human Species, as an aide-memoir, and I name 5 different species here. I'm aware of more now. As a matter of fact, I saw a document just a few days ago that mentioned 20. And I think you, Mr. Chairman, were interested in some of the places they might come from. And I have in here Zeta Reticuli, R-E-T-I-C-U-L-I, Reticuli, the Pleiades, Orion, Andromeda, and the Altair star systems. So I don't think we can any more refer to them as they, because they're not an amorphous mass. They are different species and consequently may have different agendas. I don't think we can say that they all have the same agenda any more than we could say that the United States, China, and Russia had the same agenda. Our real interests may be very similar, but as of now, our perceived interests are still quite far apart. One more observation before I begin what I want to say, and that is that we spent quite a bit of time talking about the 66-year-old cadavers, and I was glad to have Linda this morning finally say that there are live ETs on Earth at this present time, and at least 2 of them probably working with the United States government. The other species that I learned about not too long ago was called the tall whites. And this is when Paula Harris broke the story just a few years ago. And through her good offices, I had the chance to talk for about 3 hours with former Airman Charles Hall and listen to this absolutely fascinating story of how he was working with, first of all, he was scared out of his skin, but after that, when he got to know them, how he was working with, and finally they became to trust each other and have a good working relationship with the tall whites at the gunnery range at Indian Springs in Nevada. And these tall whites were living on United States Air Force property and working in cooperation with the United States Air Force and sharing technology with them. He wrote a book, incidentally, called Millennial Hospitality. There are 4 different versions, but Paula says that Millennial Hospitality number 2 is the best. I think that's the one I read, and it's a very interesting read if you want to sort of get inside the problem of what it's like to bump into these people floating across the terrain in the desert. Well, enough on that for now. My interest is in full disclosure. And my only caveat is I think probably I would say 95 to 98% full disclosure. I know of 1 or 2 things that I'm not sure should be in the public domain, at least yet. They will be someday, I'm sure, but not maybe immediately. But just as children survive the idea of the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus when they become adult, I think that tax-paying citizens are quite capable of accepting the new and broader reality that we live in a cosmos teeming with life of various sorts. The fact that some other civilizations are more advanced than we are may be humbling, but that could be a necessary step in our survival.
Well, look who we have here.
I know it sounds crazy,